Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, a Pittsburgh Steelers podcast made by fans like you, for fans like you. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. I am your host, Joe Kuzma, and I want to thank everyone listening, whether you're a returning listener or whether this is your first time listening to the Steel City Underground podcast, for helping make July the most successful, the most listened to month yet of this show, Steel City Underground podcast, with over 1,000 new listeners in the month of July alone. Thank you for sharing with your friends. Thank you for spreading the word. And thank you for those of you who took the time to rate and review us on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. It is definitely appreciated, and things are only getting bigger and better as football is finally back. We're into the training camp season. We're about to be into the preseason with football about 2 weeks away. However, today's show going to be a little departure from the norm, and from the sounds of things, sounds like you guys really enjoy some of the things I bring to you. I think you're really going to like today's show too. We're going to get off of the little training camp predictions, trying to figure out who's going to get cut, who's going to make it, who's battling with who. We're going to have a really good show on that later this week, but today I've got something unique, something different. We're going to be looking back into the past, but if you need your training camp fix, there's plenty of news over on steelcityunderground.com, including if you haven't already signed up for and received your free copy of the 2016 preseason welcome guide that we have put out. It details every new player coming into the Steelers, gives you some background information from the 2015 season, including stats, coaching staff, and etc. It's about 25 pages long, and it is yours absolutely free if you'd like to sign up for that. Go head on over to steelcityunderground.com/preseason, and you could sign up for the welcome guide. All you really have to do is join our mailing list, and of course, if you don't like, we send an email maybe once or twice a month. If you don't like that, then by all means, you could always unsubscribe from that too. No hurt feelings here. I know most of you from Steelers Nation just love to get your Steelers fix any way you can, and this preseason guide has got all of the information. It was actually really good. I enjoyed putting it and compiling most of the data together in there myself, just as a little bit of a recap of all of these outstanding young men and these football players that are joining the Pittsburgh Steelers here in 2016. Also want to remind all of you listeners, if you would like to have a question featured here on the podcast, please give us a call on our hotline. Leave us a message at 203-900-4SCU. Got maybe one or two shows coming up later this week that we will be able to answer your questions right here on the Steel City Underground podcast. But today, instead of looking ahead into 2016, we're going to look behind. We're going to look at the past. We're going to look at the modern era of the National Football League and the Pittsburgh Steelers since the NFL and AFL merger. At this time, I'd like to welcome my guest, Scott Perry. He is the author of a visual reference called The NFL Since 1970. Scott, how are you doing today?
Great, Joe. Thanks for having me on. It's an awesome show.
Yeah, and thank you. And you had some kind words to say on your site. Now, for those of you who haven't followed any of Scott's work, he is the author of a book titled NFL Since 1970, the ultimate visual and historical NFL standings reference. And if anyone were to visit your website, which is NFLsince1970.com, particularly listeners of my show are followers of a specific team, Steeler Nation or Steelers Nation, as I was telling you or discussing off the air here, they're going to see a pretty interesting array of information that comes from your book and also on your website, NFLsince1970.com. The most interesting thing to start with, Scott, is a little bit of your background, because you speak here in one of your blog posts about your father being born in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which is probably still considered Steelers country even geographically, because as we know, Steelers Nation has no boundaries. But you kind of, we're giggling off the air here because you are a Denver Broncos fan and you tend to kind of loathe the success that is the Pittsburgh Steelers. So just to clear the air here, as I like to do with the Steel City Underground, I work and network with so many great NFL writers, bloggers, podcasters, and now a historian like yourself who will be contributing from time to time some interesting information since the 1970s. What specifically got you started with the concept for your book and your website? Why the 1970s, Scott?
That's a good question, and it's kind of a process. Becoming a fan, living in Rochester, New York in the late 70s, the NFL films that got me really hooked. I mean, I lived in Denver in the past, and I was living in Rochester, and I knew I was becoming a football fan, and it was just a no-brainer to pick the Bills as my second favorite and the Broncos as my first favorite. So, but it was these guys' slow motion coverage of the weekly games with that heart-pounding music that started the process. And I moved to Denver in 1981. So from 81 to 85 is as a teenager, seeing the Broncos not have a lot of success, that gave me the idea of a statistic to show myself, to prove that I was a fan of a good team.
Yeah, that's very interesting because a lot of people are probably saying, well, Joe, you're the Steel City Underground. You're Pittsburgh Steelers. So what are you doing with having the enemy on? Well, Scott is actually, he covers all of the NFL teams and just with the Broncos being his favorite. And I've got some personal interesting Broncos information that I said I would discuss with you on the air here. Not necessarily, and I mentioned this on other episodes before, and maybe one of the reasons that we actually connected, I was able to work with one of the bloggers. I think it was Planet Broncos or Broncos Planet, as I was telling you last year before the playoff series. We did a collaboration piece. I have several friends. Actually, one of my best friends is a major Denver Broncos fan. He says you got to trust John Elway and the whole Terrell Davis salute and everything like that. And those kind of were a little bit of painful memories for some of the Steelers fans growing up in the 90s. Where, Bill Cowher had this team running on all cylinders, and they would get to an AFC championship or run into the Denver Broncos in the playoffs. But even that, just looking as a fan overall of the NFL, there is a lot of interesting information here about the Pittsburgh Steelers and about all NFL teams. This is a nice visual reference. I'm actually looking at a page that Scott sent over with all the different rankings and the win percentages since 1970, kind of the borderline year that you chose, which is interesting, at least for Steelers fans, because in one of your recent updates to your website and giving some of the information from your book, you have that the Pittsburgh Steelers between 1970 and 2015 are the best team in professional sports in that time frame. And you care to elaborate just a little bit, because as you noted, and I got a chuckle out of this because I know it was really, I was needling you because being the Steelers fan, and you were saying the previous history from basically 1933 through 1970, you had said you could fit the whole history of highlights for the Pittsburgh Steelers on the side of a pencil and still read it after several sharpenings. But since 1970, that has certainly changed. So feel free to explain yourself, sir.
Well, it's just the way it is. It's history. So the book is a result of Denver not making the playoffs for 5 straight years from 81 to 85. And 80, just real quick, 85, Denver sets the NFL record for most wins at 11. Tied by the Patriots in 08, but they lose twice to the hated Raiders in overtime. The Cleveland Browns win your division with a 500 record, so they're hosting Miami, and the Broncos are watching them from home. Patriots get the tiebreaker and then win 3 road games and go to the bowl that year. So as a frustrated 18 or 19-year-old, that was the last straw. The second to last straw was the year before, Elway's first year starting. He wins 13 games. Pittsburgh has 9 wins. They came to Denver and they beat us. So I wasn't over that yet. And then 85 happens where we win 11 games and we stay home. So in order to feel good, I added up every game played since the merger. And that's where the genesis of the book is. And at that point, there was 28 teams, and 7 teams, including Pittsburgh, had a better record than Denver. But I felt better because that was proof that I was a fan of a great organization. Now, Pittsburgh, their first 2 years, so 70 isn't a random year. It's the start of the modern era. I mean, that's the first year the AFL was joined by 3 teams, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Baltimore, to join the original AFL teams and became the AFC that year. So I knew Denver was the single worst AFL team. Only team not to play for the AFL championship from 60 to 69. Only team to lose almost 100 games during the 60s. So if I started this book in 60, I wasn't going to get where I wanted to be about feeling better about being a Bronco fan. So that's it. I mean, and then Steelers, if you go to I'm giving the end of the book away, but the Steelers have an 18-game lead over Denver in every game played since 70, and they have a 3-game championship count over Denver and a 1-game lead over the Niners and Cowboys. So,
yeah, I think the approach that you took to this specifically, that's what I was getting at with NFL Since 1970, of course, is the name of the book, available on NFLSince1970.com. And Scott had taken Since 1970 because, again, this is the start of the modern era. This is actually the time when most people would be accused of jumping on the Steelers bandwagon, of course, with all the Super Bowl wins. But not everything is measured by championships. And it's very interesting to see and look back over this strong period of time here. If you look at it as a whole big picture, of course, the Pittsburgh Steelers and our fans, and I was talking to you again about this off the air too, recently did a podcast about whether or not Pittsburgh Steelers fans were oversensitive and spoiled because let's just face it, we haven't had a losing season since 2003. We had a pair of 8-8, kiss your sister, 500 tie level seasons where they didn't make the playoffs. And even going back before then, I think they only really had 3 really bad years there, even with Bill Cowher. So they were kind of steamrolling through even the 90s when Cowher took the reins in 1992 and went on. So the Steelers are one of the most winningest teams, and they're in that what you call the 400 club. And also in there, most people wouldn't realize is the Miami Dolphins. Now, I'm saying most people wouldn't realize because, of course, I'm only 34 years of age. Older fans would probably recognize like the undefeated seasons with the Miami Dolphins. And in fact, that was one of the more promising years of the Pittsburgh Steelers, where they were beaten by that juggernaut, that perfect team that won the Super Bowl. And then, of course, the Dallas Cowboys, who were always a nemesis with the Pittsburgh Steelers for a very long time. And you had even mentioned this, that the Steelers would go on into the 47th NFL season since the merger with a slightly decreased lead over the rest of the league in win percentage. And they had taken a little bit of a dip with like those 8-8 seasons. But the Dallas Cowboys, of course, always a thorn in the Steelers' side. And it was one of those things where the Steelers won in 74 and 75 in the Super Bowl, and then they followed those losses. Like you're talking about the Oakland Raiders, for example, and the Oakland Raiders were one of those teams that they were actually very good for some time and actually better than your Broncos. Is that correct?
Oh, certainly. I mean, it's the 70s the Raiders won 5 or 6 straight divisions in the 70s, so they were the dominant team, and that's why it's a big deal for me to put a 3 next to the trophy count, next to the Bronco helmet. So that's a huge mute button in the sky for Raider fans to hit. They had only had championships on it at this point. They haven't won their division since 2002. They haven't had a winning season since 2002. So we've passed our division count now is 15 for the Broncos, 12 for the Raiders since the merger.
Yeah, so that's one thing to look at when you're looking at the period piece, is that the Oakland Raiders, of course, being ahead of the Broncos there, and it's almost flip-flopped. And I mentioned the Raiders a lot of times as being almost like a doormat or one of the teams you don't want to emulate, much like the Cleveland Browns have been since like at least 1999, maybe 1 or 2 playoff appearances since then. For the team. And of course, Scott, my wife being the Cleveland Browns fan, I deal with that misery, but I also know some Raiders fans too. And I'm always telling them, hey, things are going to maybe they're looking up, or maybe they're going to turn around. But of course, the Denver Broncos, they're closing that gap there. They had the Peyton Manning going out. I think most Steeler fans realize, even though losing in the playoffs, that being our last game last year, we realize we're without like Antonio Brown, Ben Roethlisberger. They weren't even sure he was going to play with like a hurt shoulder. And this isn't excuses, of course, but we weren't expecting our team to compete with your team at this point. Third string running back, et cetera, et cetera. We already knew the defense was pretty lousy. So if we were going to lose, we didn't want to lose to the New England Patriots, let's put it that way. And if we're going to lose, a lot of Steelers fans, I think, have a tremendous amount of respect for how the Denver Broncos organization's run, for general manager John Elway. Maybe even if, I don't know, I always respected Elway as a player too, even though, like, I always thought, I don't know, there was always something about him where he doesn't get mentioned in the same context of like the Joe Montanas, and he's almost like another type of Terry Bradshaw, where Terry Bradshaw was doing things that other passers weren't doing in his era. So if we were going to lose to a team and a team was going to go and win that Super Bowl, I think most people wanted that happy ending to Peyton Manning's career and see him hoist the Lombardi trophy at the end of it, retire, go off into the sunset, etc. And just looping back around to the Dallas Cowboys is one of the most winningest teams. The Steelers did have their number up until the first Super Bowl I was able to witness in my lifetime in 1995. Unfortunately, that was a loss, and I was telling you, I had one of these original Myron Cope terrible towels. I don't even know if I was actually a teenager yet. In 95, it was probably like 12 or 13 at the time, and I think I may have actually cried into this old terrible towel. I had it tucked away somewhere now. But at the same time, I'm not sure that you're much of a video game guy, but there are people listening to the show that are big John Madden football or Madden video game fans. And back in that era, the most you could do if you were the Pittsburgh Steelers and you're playing those games, it was like Super Nintendo, and even then on like the PlayStation and PlayStation 2s, the Pittsburgh Steelers didn't have a very respectable video game team. So you always found myself playing with other teams. I mean, you could always ram it down someone's throat with Jerome Bettis, but they didn't have the most accurate passers. You had like Tommy Maddox in the video game, and he wasn't very good. So I found myself a lot of times playing with the Denver Broncos, believe it or not, and playing with John Elway, Terrell Davis, Ed McCaffrey, Rod Smith. I like know almost all of the players because I played with them that much. It almost seems like blasphemy, but I tell you what, you get you video game guys that are out there. If I find your screen name, I find you're a Steelers fan and you're not playing with the Steelers, I'm going to call you out on it too. So don't call me out on it. But yeah, and then on the defense, I want to say, who was it? It was Trevor Price, I think, was one of the guys. Like, I always like to play with the defensive linemen. So playing with the Steelers was always fun because they did have a good defense in the game. But that's my little story with the Denver Broncos, aside from having some friends that are some big Broncos fans. But of course, this being an NFL book and being packed with a lot of information about the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they get compared as being like kind of the thorn in your side because being a Broncos fan, well, let's just face it. I mean, a lot of people don't like the New York Yankees because they're always a winning franchise. Same with the St. Louis Cardinals in Major League Baseball. So us Steeler fans have to realize that not, everyone isn't like looking up to us and saying, hey, we love the Steelers. No, they want to love their own team and see them be successful. So it's neat to see your team, the Denver Broncos, kind of climb into this discussion as well. But you also have some other interesting information. I see here you have some info about the New England Patriots just climbing up the charts at like a crazy pace because, of course, the New England Patriots, it almost seems like it's clever marketing or branding. Before, when they had the white helmets, before they went to this silver and like real patriotic thing, and they had the real ugly like red uniforms and white helmets, their teams were awful. And so tell us a little bit about the Patriots just climbing up the ladder here, just their ridiculous pace that everyone's going to have to try and keep up with. Because also in this too, you could probably mention the Seattle Seahawks are somewhere in there too. They're kind of up and down, but they once too were a doormat that's kind of rebounded in the grand scheme of things.
Let me give an overview of the book real quick. What the book is it's the helmets worn each season. So if a team changed a face mask, I changed it. So when the 79 Bengals had a gray face mask with the word Bengals, the 80 had a black face mask with the word Bengals, and 81 had the stripes. So that's how meticulous I had to have this book look. Now the Patriots changed their helmet in 1993, and they weren't that great the first couple of years, but then they progressed. And, of course, they got Belichick in 2000, and by 2001, that was the start. Brady shows up. Now, it's the standings using the helmets. Below that is a grid showing the playoffs and who won the championship, where it was played, and then above that is the helmet of the Super Bowl champion and how many times they were champions of the NFL in their entire history, not just in 70. The page after that is the compilation. So every year I divide the league in half, and I put the winning side on the left, and on the right is the losing side, and then I stack those on the far right of the page from 1 to 32, or how many teams there are. So you flip the page and you watch the team go up and down. So if you start in 2000 with the Patriot helmet as it first appears in the book, which is the Minuteman helmet, and you watch that go up, you're going to see it go from the 20th to what could be the 5th. If they don't win, or if the Patriots win opening day and the Niners lose, he'll have taken them from the 20th spot as far as the best 20th best winning percentage in the league since the merger for that franchise. And he'll have gotten him to the 5th spot. Yeah, just to touch base on that, I want to bring the Seahawks, for the first time in their history since 76, they have a winning record. If you add up every regular season game played, they're now 2 over 500. So they've come on quite a bit. They've gotten 3 NFC titles since moving to the NFC in 2002. So that's another team that's moving up. They're now on the winning side. But real quick, I want to mention the 2 other quarterbacks. Favre and Brady, or Manning, take over the teams that are either the lower half of the losing side, and they both take them over to the bottom half of the winning side before they're done. So it's an encouragement for young fans or teams that are stuck on the bottom of the losing side, because one quarterback alone can throw the team on their shoulders and get them over to the winning side of the equation on what this book shows.
Yeah, and you know what? And Steelers fans definitely know what that's like, because there was a miserable period of time where we had guys like Mark Malone and Bubby Brister that were the quarterbacks in the 80s. And then, of course, there was that period of time where Bill Cowher was pretty much trying to put anybody he could find under center. And I think that's why the Steelers for a long time were a run-based team as well, because they had guys that were capable. It's kind of like, reminds you of even like when Trent Dilfer won a Super Bowl ring with the Baltimore Ravens. He was just considered like a game manager, and there are several other quarterbacks who fall into that category. But just to reiterate or expound upon what Scott was saying about this book, if you were to see it, and a lot of this is a visual reference, and you're looking at the charts by year, the right-hand page of this guide has just one single column of all the helmets from top to bottom. And what he's explaining is that they're in order of where they move up and down on this list, almost like if you have like a kid's kind of animated flip book and you were to flip the pages with your thumb, you would see where the helmets move up and down. And it's a very unique and different concept that he's integrated into this book, aside from all of the statistical analysis. So it's very, very cool. I wanted to mention just maybe a few of the other teams too, because the NFL is probably at its height of popularity, and I think it still has room to improve. You see now, Monday Night Football used to be the big thing. Now it's also Sunday Night Football has become the premier game. You have Thursday night games almost every week of the year now. So Steelers fans are also fans of the NFL. A lot of fans listening are playing fantasy football. They are playing the Madden video games. They know a lot more about other NFL squads other than just their own. So if this piques your interest, there's also information. We mentioned the Dallas Cowboys, and the Dallas Cowboys are actually, I know last year kind of threw like a wrench into this whole thing. They were competing with the Dolphins. The Dolphins have been largely miserable ever since Don Shula had left. They had a little bit of success there with Jimmy Johnson, but pretty much since Dan Marino had called it quits, their team has been floundering in obscurity almost after being one of the model franchises for many years. And the Dallas Cowboys have been going back and forth with them, moving up and down these ranks. And, of course, the Cowboys were getting back into contention, too. And then last year, they also had a pretty miserable season. But the interesting one out of all of this to me, and I don't think I would have necessarily realized, that the Minnesota Vikings are vying to stay in, well, not only just the top 10, but they're like a top 5 or top 6 team. And again, they're back into the whole playoff discussion last year. Care to share a little bit about where the Vikings fit into this whole picture?
Well, the Vikings are an anomaly. They're the number 12 team right now is the Eagles, and they have a 1960 championship. That's history of a championship. So the number 7 team right now is the Vikings, and they're the only team in the top 11 that doesn't have a trophy next to the name at the current standings. So they start off in the early 70s up there because they have many wins in the early 70s, and they've never left the top 7 in all 46 seasons of NFL history. It's really an amazing story to see this franchise do that consistently good. They have a 21-game lead as of today over the Packers. One of the pages in the book puts the divisions in division format with the win-loss record of every game played since the merger. And that game, they picked up a game last year, so it's still a 20-game lead over the Packers, but no titles. I mean, it's visually, you look at the Falcons beating them in '98 when they had, rest in peace Dennis Green. He had that kicker miss his only field goal of the season.
Yeah,
and I feel bad because as Bronco fans, it took until '77 to have had 17 years of team history to have a winning season and a playoff shot, and this team is still going through that Super Bowl drought. So amazing. Teams are stuck on the bottom of the losing side. Vikings are number 7. They've never been lower than that as far as their winning percentage in the regular season.
Yeah, and even from what I see here too, one thing that's a little bit interesting, and hopefully I don't throw a curveball by mentioning this because this is a little off the script here, but as you're going through all of these guides and seeing, there are actually some of the expansion teams that have come in they kind of jump in and are a little bit further up the charts because unlike the Cleveland Browns, of course, moved to Baltimore. And when they became the Baltimore Ravens, they ceased to have the history. They were almost treated, even though they had the same personnel as when they were the Browns, they no longer retained the Browns' history. So that was a clean slate there. And, of course, you have teams that are completely new to the NFL, like the Jacksonville Jaguars or the Carolina Panthers when I believe they entered the league in 1995. And then, or was that 96? It was one or the other.
95.
It was 95. And then the Houston Texans in 2002. So where do these teams kind of fall in the charts in relation to everything?
It's strictly, I rank all 32 strictly by their winning percentage. Once they hit the field, when they won or lost on the regular season field, it's how they rank. So as of today, by going 15-1, the Carolina Panthers are now 3 games under 500 for their history in the regular season. So they're on the bottom of the winning column right now at 166, 169, and 1. So both the Jaguars and the Panthers Jaguars were top 10 for a couple of years when they surprised the league in the late 90s, going to Buffalo, going to Denver, and winning, and losing in New England with a chance to play the Panthers had they won in Green Bay. I mean, year 2 of these existence of these two teams, they could have been a Super Bowl. That's really a bizarre story in NFL history. But the other, that's just amazing. And the Texans aren't an issue. They're right now they're 97 and 127. They're 28th. The Jaguars are 24th out of 32. And the Ravens, unfortunately, I'm a big anti-Raven guy.
Then you fit right in with everyone else here. The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Right. Well, the reason this book is helmets only, and I had to have it look like this. I didn't want to have to name city changes or nickname changes. If you don't know the helmet from that 1980 season, then you got to learn it because I didn't want to have to bother with changing things that I'm a purist. I wanted to have the league look like it did back in 1979 when I was a first fan. So this LA Ram thing has been a big boon for me. I'm very happy to have the LA part of the Ram organization back in place there. But one thing I wanted to mention is the Dolphins situation. The Dolphins, this first year I did this book was after the 2009 season. It's something I self-published, and I've been updating it every year since then. So leading that whole year I spent making this book, it was a lot of effort, but I was going to call it Chasing Dolphins because 1984 Marino loses a Super Bowl, but the result is that they take over the first place in winning percentage since 70, and they don't lose it. Well, here's what happened. Pittsburgh goes to Miami the last game of the season of the 2009 season. So I'm finishing up the book as we do this. It's a bizarre story. And I couldn't believe my calculator when I got done with this. The result of Pittsburgh winning in Miami in 2009 to end the season is 372 wins for both teams, 242 losses for both teams, and a pair of ties for both teams. The one time I had to go 4 decimal places to determine who got the spot, and it was for the top spot. Here's the difference. Miami came to Denver in 1971 and tied a game. So for me to do the calculations in this book, I have to go back and look at every tie game for each franchise in those 2 seasons, because that number of ties is backed out of the number I divide as games played. So that gave the Dolphins the 2009 season. So from 84 to 2009, they had a 6.056 winning percentage. Pittsburgh had a 6.055 winning percentage. Just one of the bizarre anomalies I discovered in doing this book. So I thought, okay, well, it's one more year of the Dolphins. And I had a really bad feeling that I can't call this book Chasing Dolphins when they're tied with Pittsburgh. So that idea went out the window. And of course, what happened in 2010, Dolphins went 7-9, Pittsburgh went 12-4, and that's the start. Pittsburgh's now entering their 6th season as the number 1 team in wins since 70, and they pulled away that year, and they're trying to get away from my Broncos, but I'm hoping they're going to reel them in.
Yeah, and from what I see here, you're saying that at the end of the regular season 2020, assuming still 17-week season, you're saying 64 games are left, and that the Steelers have about an 18-game lead over Denver. So we're looking at almost a neck-and-neck race where we're coming around the corner towards a 50th or 50 seasons in the modern era. I don't want to say 50th season of the NFL or whatever with the Super Bowl. That would really confuse people based on last year.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
And as I'm looking at this right now, you're saying on average they had the best shot of winning it.
Yeah, 61% of the time the Steelers take the field since 70 till today, and Denver's 59% of the time that they've taken the field that they've won their games.
That's just incredible. And now, may I ask, the team with the worst percentage is at the bottom. What's their win percentage if you have it handy?
I do. They've won 38.5% of their games. Can you guess?
38.5. Would we be maybe Tampa Bay?
That's a ding ding right there.
All right. How about that?
That's impressive.
I get a prize.
So I have some. Yeah. So that's a good call. So, I have a voicemail from Jim Sacamano saying, this is about 4 seasons ago. It says, "Hey Scott, I want you to know Pat Bowlen really enjoyed the material. He thinks you're a tremendous fan, and he wants you to know that he really enjoyed the book. He wasn't going to help me market it all, but he said that it's tremendous." So I'm a big Pat Bowlen fan because he really did a lot for this franchise. Two months ago, I put the new Pat Bowlen page in, the last page of the book, and every game played since 1984 till today is 511 games, and I only included the 27 teams that have played those 511 games. I'm mentioning this because it's an anomaly between the first and last place team. So the Broncos are the only team in that 31 season period to not have 200 losses yet. They're 313, 197, and 1.
Wow.
The Steelers are 4th at 301, 209, and 1 tie.
Wow.
One thing I got to mention, the Broncos have 3 championships, Steelers have 2. So I saw that and I put that in there and I'm like, that's a big deal. I mean, just to have anything over Pittsburgh. I mean, the Raiders are far in the rearview mirror. You guys are still ahead of us, but there's a stat that, Bowlen bought the team and it's just been an amazing run for him.
Wait, could you say that one more time? It's 3 championships. The 2 was...
It's the count since the 84 season, since Pat Bowlen bought the team.
Oh, okay. Now I follow. Yeah, Pat Bowlen, obviously a great owner, tremendous amount of respect for most of the owners. I mean, most people don't realize exactly what it is that they do. One of the legendary owners, of course, we're losing some of them, like they're just dropping like flies, like Lamar Hunt, for example, several years ago, and it's just, and then Pat Bowlen, of course, stepping down. It's unfortunate. I mean, these guys are getting up there. I mean, I actually saw the older Mr. Rooney, as I would like to call him, at the Hall of Fame induction ceremony last year in August of 2015. He was actually coming off one of the tour buses. Also got to see like John Madden and seeing these legends of the game. And man, Mr. Rooney, I'm a bigger guy. I'm about 6'5", 230, 240. So I'm about wide receiver size, except I'm not like jacked, cut, and fast. I'm older and slow. And of course, I told you I like the craft beer. So that's not the type of fuel that athletes use.
funny.
So, but yeah, I stand and I just see Mr. Rooney kind of like go by, and you're like, oh my God, like I could have touched him. It's like, I want to touch him, this guy, he has, of course, his gold jacket and everything on, and you see him go by, and it's really neat to see him get out and about. He even came all the way down from the press box during the Mean Joe Green ceremony that they had at Heinz Field 2 years ago. I mean, just you could tell he really cares. He cares for his team. He cares for the fans. He cares for the city and everything he does. And Pat Bowlen is a mirror image of that with Denver, with the city, and the Denver Broncos. And of course, just talking about Pat Bowlen, I wanted to bring up an interesting Mike Tomlin stat that I threw out on one of our featured daily Steelers grind that we do. If you're not familiar, Scott, or any of the listeners, have a daily post, at least the 5 business days. Sometimes I don't get to it on the weekend just because, hey, I need a break too. But I find some of the cool stuff that's out there on social media, the various tweets, Facebook posts, YouTube videos, and that. And I put out Peter King from Sports Illustrated. A lot of people talk about Mike Tomlin, and they say the Tomlin detractors are interesting. He says playoff 6 of 9 years, better win percentage than Chuck Noll or Bill Cowher. And he has left a few W's on the table. Yes, they all have. To which I actually replied to Peter King. I didn't expect any response. Of course he didn't, but that's okay. Compared to Peter King, I'm nobody. I wanted to mention that Mike Tomlin was also the 9th coach in NFL history to reach 90 wins, with 92 currently, and he could reach 100 if he wins 8 or more this year. That would be 110 seasons, or more than 100, depending on what the final record is. So it's just when you're looking at these franchises and what they do right, even with the Broncos and the Steelers, when they change coaches, they seem to do it right. They seem to find franchise quarterbacks from time to time. You even see the Broncos now with the defense. The Steelers are now going from defense to offense, it looks like. It's just one of these cyclical things. You got to wonder if a few of these teams will ever turn it around. If you ever seen any type of pattern when doing some of the statistical analysis, I know you mentioned quarterbacks, and quarterbacks were largely tied to it. Is that pretty much the basis for everything? Because I want to say, just one more thought on that. I want to say I heard somewhere before that one of the main statistics to winning, one of those 3 was how many sacks you get and how many sacks you give up, which of course would also fall on the quarterback's shoulders.
It's a good point on both sides of the line. So it's the quarterback being able to keep his feet or knock him down. So it's just ownership, quarterbacks. It seems like those are just the 2 biggest driving forces in getting the team over to the winning side of this book. It's just such a powerful thing to have, the Ursays or the Bidwells, wake up and figure out a way to get their franchise shaken up. So that's a huge part of it. It's just so I mentioned the Bronco page with Pat Bowlen because I wanted to mention the 27th team out of 27 that have played 511 regular season games. So the Broncos are the only team not to have lost 200. The Lions are the only team not to have won 200. They have the mirror record of the Broncos. So 197, 313, and 1 is the Lions record. So what are the odds of that? You put the first team and the last team together and you get a 500 record. It's just bizarre. And that's another, what does that say about the ownership there? The Buccaneers are right above them, Cardinals above them, Rams above them. So it's a roster of ownership to see how competent the owners are. It's just a wacky situation.
Yeah, and it's rather unfortunate with Detroit too, because it's another city that has a drought when it comes to championships. Cleveland finally kind of breaking that curse with the Cavaliers, LeBron finally bringing it home. But if anyone was born in 1970 or later, or maybe even just a little bit prior since that merger, Detroit Lions, one of the few teams left that have not played in a Super Bowl, but had a rich history, rich tradition prior to that. Unlike our previous comment about putting the history on the side of the pencil with the Steelers, the Steelers were a very bad football team in the old NFL, moved over when there was the merger, one of the original teams to have done so, maybe actually only the only team to have done so that moved over from the NFL. And then, but the Detroit Lions are a polar opposite, where the Steelers kind of righted the ship and went on to be successful, the Detroit Lions were actually a pretty good and championship quality caliber team. And then when the merger, and ever since the merger, they have just been in the basement, and it's kind of unfortunate. I do feel for their fans, and they do have some diehard fans that still pull for them all the time. And then also the one that really pains both you and I, you're talking about the 34 games that separate the New England Patriots from the number one spot, which is occupied by the Pittsburgh Steelers. And a lot of people would think, well, are they going to be able to do that by the 50th season of the modern era, by this week 17 of 2020? And as you had said, if you go and flip the pages of the book and just see that Patriot helmet just climb up toward the top an inch, also considering the ownership and we already talked about the Miami Dolphins, but also the Buffalo Bills and New York Jets, who have not been strong franchises over the years, playing in that AFC East division. The Patriots, I've accused them of this many a times. I said, man, I only wish that the Steelers had played like almost these gimme games. It seems like those franchises always find a way to just give up games and give the Patriots the division and, of course, a bye. So it almost seems unfair in that type of situation. And, of course, it's not impossible that the Patriots may make this meteoric that's not the word, mediocrity. I wish they were mediocre. Meteoric rise to the top. And as we both said earlier, we don't want to see that happen.
Right. So on the Patriots here, so the beauty of the book and the really fun part of the book is after I finish the compilation, I add a page every year. So the compilation is 70 to 15. And then I go by decade. I do just the 70s, the 80s, 90s, 2000s, the current decade, and then I do every game played since the turn of the century. It just so happens the turn of the century is when the Patriots started their prominence. And I do like little liner notes at the bottom of these pages where I do every NFL team in the earlier pages. And once I ran out of 32 pages, I just started doing liner notes of what I thought was happening each season. So going into this coming season, here's what I write in the bottom. It says, Patriots can go 13-3 in 2016. And then not win a game for 17, 18, or the 19 season, and still average 10 wins a year for the 20 years from the start of the decade. It's unbelievable. They have a 20 game lead as of today from the start of the century over the Colts, and it's 23 game lead over the Steelers. Steelers are third in every game played this century, regular season.
And if there's any opportunity to slow that runaway train down, it's that Tom Brady suspension to start the season, which may actually end up benefiting him. But, Scott, it was great having you on. These are some fascinating statistics and stories. Why don't, once again, let's tell the listeners where they could find your book, which is titled NFL Since 1970, the Ultimate Visual and Historical NFL Standings Reference.
Great. Appreciate that. So it's a self-published book. I make it in my basement. I have it printed on really nice paper, and then I bind it myself for one reason. I make 32 different versions. So if someone sends me an email at Scott@NFL Since 1970, and they're the first Steeler fan, I'm going to include a 1984 Slurpee coin with Franco Harris. So I don't know if that appeals to anybody, but if you tell me, I'm trying to bust up my card collection. So they email me that they want a book, and they tell me they're pre-1992, 2 or 3 favorite Steelers. I'll insert a couple of football cards in with them, but they're $22.50. I'll mail them a free page every season. So if they win the bowl next year, they can just insert the page with the number 9 championship on it. So it's a unique gift. Kids love it because it's just helmets, and it's something you can't find anywhere but through me. And it's just a funky endeavor that I did just for myself to do it. I figured someone else might like it, and I knew Steeler Nation would be a good match to talk to him about it.
Yeah, that is actually very fascinating. I wasn't aware that you sent updates to the book. I used to get like this sports binder type subscription when I was younger, and it used to have, speaking of Detroit Lions, Barry Sanders and then Billy Sims were two of the pages I remember getting in one of the updates, and you kind of put it in by year, and that was very neat. So this is very cool that this book is actually customized to any of the teams. So if you fans that are listening right now, you happen to be a Steelers fan and you're in a house divided like I am, with my wife being a Cleveland Browns fan, they could get a blank page inserted into the book detailing all of the great accomplishments of the Cleveland Browns. No, I'm just teasing, but it's very cool. It's personalized for your favorite team, and of course you could get your copy by going to NFLsince1970.com. Scott Perry, thank you once again for joining me. Hopefully we'll have you on again sometime here in the near future, because I'm sure there's all kind of different statistical analysis and breakdown. And I also want to let all the Steel City Underground website visitors be aware and know that Scott from time to time may pop in and drop a neat historical reference or article over on steelcityunderground.com. Once again, thanks for joining us today, Scott.
Appreciate it. It was a great time.
Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, be safe, be good, and I will catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.